In this video, we're going to talk about the top tropes of Christian apologetics. We're going to go through some of Christian apologetics' favorite arguments, favorite cliches, favorite heuristics. These are a lot of big words I'm throwing out. But at the bottom line, we just want to think through why Christian apologetics, almost as a discipline, does certain types of things. So we're focusing a little less on like specific evidence and a lot of like big picture thinking about how Christian apologetics works. And I couldn't think of anybody better to do this with and to help me think through these than Paul from Apologia. So Paul is well known as a popular anti-apologist. Paul is the guy that makes Christian apologists get really angry and do lots of yelly, screamy types of things. So he's obviously the right person to have. Even though I think me and Paul probably exist in a slightly different space in terms of like our relationship to religion, but at the same time, I think both of us recognize the damage that Christian apologetics causes. So, Paul, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. I love your style. I love your knowledge, and you humble me. You know a lot. I love it.
Paul, this is I'm going to say right back at you because I just was watching your response to Gary Habermas the other day, and I love it. I love that you're doing this deep work and making, quite frankly, the entire field of apologetics react to you. Sometimes not even mentioning your name, but you're responding to you as the unnamed. Yeah, exactly.
There is a dubstep cut of apologists mispronouncing my name that is out there somewhere, so it's pretty fun.
Like Paulogia. Anyway, man, thank you so much for joining me, and I think we're going to get right to it. Are you ready to go, Paul?
I'm ready to go.
All right, let's go. So, Paul, first question. Do you really believe that something can come out of nothing? I mean, the argument here is pretty simple. Like, it's really hard to imagine a time when there's nothing. So we have to go back to some kind of unmoved mover, Aristotelian first cause. What do you say to that? Is it really possible something could come out of nothing?
Well, this is one of my least favorite apologetic straw men, because generally in the field of cosmology and generally among people who have methodological naturalism, they don't believe there ever was nothing. So, for example, even in the theme song to the Big Bang, the whole universe was in a hot, dense state. There was something. There was always something, and most cosmologists posit eternal energy or eternal something, like quantum vacuum, something along the line. So when it's very much a straw man, but it makes sense to someone sitting in the church pew who hasn't really thought it through. I guess you're kind of thinking, oh, sure, there must have been philosophically nothing at some point. The trouble is that no theistic worldview posits something from nothing either, because they all posit that there was a god or gods that were eternal as well, or that always existed. So this is the same problem for both camps. There's a brute fact at the end of all worldviews, and so pretend that one worldview has a brute fact and one worldview doesn't, and perhaps you can philosophically brute fact makes sense to you, right? What does that mean to you?
That's interesting. The thing that just hit me as you were saying that, I've honestly never thought about this before, is that Christians also posit eternality. Like, Christians also posit the infinite. And it's weird to turn to a Christian and say, like, do you really think that material was infinite? When in reality, like, we're walking around with a set of doctrines that says there was an infinite backwards and there's an infinite forward, infinite damnation if you disbelieve, and infinite joy if you do believe. So it seems like we're both willing to accept the existence of infinity.
And neither of us are cosmologists, but of course,
I'm not. Yeah,
they would distinguish between infinity and eternity, right? Eternity, because we think our local instantiation of space-time happened at the Big Bang. That means that is when time also began there, right? But unlike Frank Turek, he wants to say that material and energy began at the Big Bang. That's not what we think. The cosmologists just think it's space-time. So this is a bit of a fast and loose for someone who's just hasn't thought something through. And I don't like it when apologists play tricks on people just based on intuition.
Are you trying to tell me that we can have morality without God? Let me make this argument really quickly, and I'll try to do my best, put on my Christian apologist hat for a minute, which I was at one point. We have all these human communities. They all seem to have some version of morality, some sort of laws that they live their life by. None of us really think that it's okay to kill people or to steal your neighbor's wife or something like that. So how can we have morality without God? Don't we need some sort of ultimate decider of morality, or kind of some kind of creator who wrote morality or a natural law into the universe, into creation? What would you say to that?
Well, just like there's something from nothing, really plays on our intuitions. We all have these very strong intuitions about what we think is right and wrong, what we think is fair and unfair, what we think is good and bad. And so it's a very effective trick to play on someone to appeal to that intuition when everyone in the room is actually having different intuitions and they don't actually even mean the same thing necessarily. When you get down to pressing someone, what is morality? If they want to say that morality is just the will of God, well, okay, then you're begging the question, right? You've inserted the answer into the definition. And it's circular. But most of us, our intuition about morality is actually the second commandment, right? So the greatest one is love the Lord God with all your heart and soul and mind. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. But the love your neighbor as yourself, that's just empathy. That's just imagining what it would be like if you were that person. Would you like what was happening? And or it's the pragmatic, oh, if I steal his car, maybe he or someone else will steal my car, right? So when you get down to empathy, the love your neighbor as yourself, the golden rule, as it were, that predates Christianity. It predates Judaism. These some versions of the golden rule are very old, but it's even older than that, because basically social species, any species where cooperation is their survival advantage, for humans it is. We're not the fastest. We can't climb the best. We can't swim the best. But our strength is working together. And so any social species needs some basis of empathy. So if you believe in evolution, as I accept evolution, you'll see that those who cooperate will be part of the group and their genes will be passed along. So we have been bred for empathy. And if your whole moral system really comes down to, I don't want to harm people and I would like people to flourish in whatever set of definition you want to give people, because we all have a different circumference of how much of the tribe we're going to include with those we care about, then you don't actually need to ground it in God. Of course, a secularist like myself, that first part of it, to love the Lord your God, if you feel that is part of morality, again, that's begging the question, but that is something that doesn't require a God to do.
There was an interesting Christopher Hitchens thing that he always said. It was something along the lines of, as the Jews walked towards Mount Sinai, they didn't walk towards Mount Sinai thinking like it's okay to kill and steal and take your neighbor's wife,
right,
your neighbor's oxen, or whatever. And then Moses comes down with the 10 Commandments and they're like, oh shit, that was wrong. We shouldn't have been doing that. Gotta quit murdering my neighbors now.
And if I had a nickel for every time, we're not talking about the, how is, we're talking about the ontology. What is it grounded on? And I'm still waiting and people like Sam Harris and many others who are smarter than I are still waiting for someone to show us what that gap is between how simple empathy explains it versus why we need more explanation. Similar to that, why is there something from nothing? You can drive yourself crazy going backwards sometimes.
There's also so much constructed in that nuance of like, I remember growing up. I don't know if you grew up like I did, and I know we had a similar upbringing, but I don't know if your church also taught this. But I thought dancing was a sin when I was growing up, and at some point along the way, the issue of dancing just went away, and dancing was okay. And that's a really silly example, but it does show the case that, like, within any discussion of morality, there are social realities. There's things that evolve. There's different. I remember a famous book. It's called Becoming Sinners, and it's about missionaries going to a I forget what, it's an uncontacted tribe, or I don't know exactly. Anyways, they went to the South Pacific to this group of people who didn't have an idea of sin. So before they could convert them, they actually had to invent an idea of sin and like actually teach them what sin was, because they couldn't ask for forgiveness for something they didn't believe in. A lot of the work I did in religious studies was as a sociologist, and I've always been really interested in sociology, and the fact that morality is there is almost just a social reality we have to deal with, as opposed to like it's not necessarily an explanatory factor. It just is like it's you've kind of come up with different reasons for it, but human communities evolve it one way or another, apparently.
And you are correct. Dancing is absolutely a sin, as is
Drinking.
playing, drinking a sin. Playing for my community, playing cards
That's
that
the
had
devil's picture book.
yeah, playing any card game that isn't Dutch Blitz is a sin.
Why was Dutch Blitz
Yeah,
okay? It was a different
because it doesn't have the
pictures.
spades, hearts, clubs, diamonds on it. Because
Okay.
that's associated with gambling.
Yeah.
So my Mennonite community actually came up with that weird. Well, I think the Dutch community, same, a lot of overlap there. So Rook was okay at Bible college as well because it just had colors, and yeah, it's apparently it's the heart and the club that makes it the sin.
Okay, it's good to know. The town I grew up in, a lot of old order Mennonites have recently moved in, and it's funny because one of my neighbors, old neighbors from when I was a kid, makes some money driving them places because they don't have, they have the horse and carriage, but like it's Canada's rural, so you can't go like 200 kilometers in a horse and carriage. So they have a doctor's appointment or something, they would pay this guy to like drive them, which I love, because it's like, I'm not going to sin and do that, but like you can, I'll pay you to do it. You can take, I don't know if that, maybe I'm oversimplifying. Apologies to you and to the former and current Mennonites watching, but it just strikes me as an interesting way to kind of get around the technicality, right?
In Southern Ontario, I sometimes am seeing Mennonite stands by the side of the road where they accept debit cards.
Yeah.
It just makes me angry. It's like, you're not allowed to do that. But anyway, 3 buttons also a sin, depending on which community you're in, versus 2 buttons. It's a whole ordeal. We have our own version of Leviticus, I think, that is unwritten.
Let's talk about the fact that there is a tremendous bias in the modern university, that people are out to get God. You have these atheist professors who doubt everything. We've had movies like God's Not Dead showing the philosophy professor that just is really angry at God secretly and wants to convert but has too much anger in his heart. I see this in my own field of biblical studies, that often people doing biblical history are accused of any number of biases, from like not including miracles as realistic sources for dating texts, to like not putting enough credibility on the New Testament, or to wanting to introduce other gospels. Anyway, there's so much I could say here, so I better not get too far into this introduction. But at its heart, like, isn't it true that part of the reason why so many people have doubts about the truth of Christianity is because so many academics are biased and spend all their time trying to destroy it? Paul?
One of the things I've learned from watching your channel, and it really struck me, the kind of way you phrase it, is that that a lot of people define sophisticated apologetics, i.e., there's camps here, right? Like, anyone who doesn't believe in the sphere you do, they are othered in some way. Either that they're othered in saying, well, they're not even Christian. I've certainly seen people take scholars like Dale Allison, who's got the best book on the resurrection that exists as far as I'm concerned, and absolutely affirms the resurrection with his own personal experiences. He's not even a Christian because he entertains some of these ideas. To Mike Lecona, who says, well, maybe the Jerusalem zombies, maybe that was apocalyptic language. And then you have to see other apologists, well, Mike's not even a Christian anymore now because he proposes those things. So you get that sphere. But you also then, more of in the Gary Habermas camp or some other camps, you kind of, well, some people are liberal scholars and some people are conservative scholars, like Biola, and those are the good ones. The way I love you phrased it is that the more sophisticated apologetics is really just the closer you get to actually mainstream scholarship. That's sophistication, and anything more along the lines of, for the Bible tells me so, that's the less sophisticated apologetics. And it's just hilarious that there's the anti-intellectual bias, and yet does seem to be some recognition in the field that the more you consider, the more biblical knowledge, the more knowledge you have, and the closer you get to scholarship, you are actually doing more sophisticated apologetics. Everyone looks their nose down in a circle somehow at each other.
I never got this until people started saying it to me. But like, because I was making these videos anti-apologetics, and the first time it ever happened, it was an apologetic professor who said something to the effect of, "Yeah, like I know some of the bad apologists do that stuff, but you need to read the good apologists." And it really is funny that there's, as you said, like there's a line from, let's get closer to critical scholarship, keeping our preconceived notions, but like adding a little bit more of a critical lens and maybe asking some hard questions about whether Genesis really is the, a founding narrative, like a historical story, or maybe it's myth. Maybe we're okay with that, but like we're not going to say the resurrection's myth. That's clearly like historical facts. So it's funny the way that trope kind of works, and I didn't notice it until recently. One of the things that I've thought about recently with the academic straw man, I want to make a video about this too, is the way that Gnosticism gets thrown out. Because I clipped an interview, and I'm going to do a video too. But one of the things I started realizing when apologists responded to me on canon was that it was almost always to say, well, anything that didn't get into the canon was Gnostic. And and this is the other one I've seen recently, is like, liberal scholars really want to push this Gnostic agenda, as if like Gnosticism is true Christianity, and as opposed to orthodoxy. And first of all, that's nonsense. Like, no liberal scholar will say Gnosticism is true Christianity. Like, I defy anybody to find that person, because it's like, it's a later movement. Nobody thinks it's true Christianity. It's just interesting to study. But it provides a really interesting trope, because anything that we don't like can be Gnostic, right? Well, why is the
Right.
Gospel of Thomas not the authentic sayings of Jesus? Because it's Gnostic. But like, what if there's an authentic tradition there that goes back to Jesus? Like, that's a question we should at least ask.
Right. They stripped it of meaning when you just apply it to it. It's kind of like the woke of the 4th century. It's like,
Exactly.
well,
That's
I
the way.
don't like it, so it's woke, it's Gnostic,
That's
it's
exactly
just
it. It's the
the other
wokeism of the
label.
fourth century. That's hilarious. That's exactly right. It's like, and when I look at early Christian writings, like I've used the example of the Didache, or like the Clementine literature, or Origin. I don't know, like any amount of early Christian writings, early Bible, like the Epistle of Barnabas and the Shepherd of Hermas, are two books that were kind of contenders for canonicity at different points. Like, neither of them is Gnostic, so it's like just such a funny idea. But it I think it gives people a safety blanket. Like, you don't have to think too hard about canon. You don't have to think too hard about if we got the right Christian text, because everything else was like this heretical movement that academics secretly love because it's heretical. But don't worry, you're safe. You're reading the right Bible.
In this subcategory, there's also what I get frustrated with: the artifice of intellectualism is in the young earth creation camp.
Uh,
There's things like the Answers Journal, which looks, by all, to an outside viewer, you pick up something, looks at the Answers Journal, it looks exactly like a peer-reviewed published journal from science or biology. It looks like the same fonts and and the same dressing, but it's all from PhDs who Ken Ham has hired to basically forgo everything they learned to get the PhD, and lend their credentials to some other field.
well, that's interesting, because you're speaking to that weird dichotomy with academia that I think plays into academic straw men, because it's like the combination of like, those are liberal academics and we're trying to discount them, and so there's like a very anti-intellectualism. But then at the same time, as you say, like there's a performative, like they're almost playing intellectuals all the time. Like, there's all like, speaking of doctors, one of my heroes growing up was a Dr. Ravi Zacharias, who had a famous fallout when it was realized he never actually earned a doctorate, but he was calling himself Dr. Ravi Zacharias. So I think eventually he did get like an honorary one from somewhere. I don't remember the whole, like, how it all played out, but the point being, that kind of fake credentialism like goes a long way. The idea that like the academy's out to get us, but at the same time we are just as educated and just as smart and have all the same credentials as the people who question us.
That is one of my No True Scotsman entries for looking at some of the research is: do you teach at a school that requires a statement of faith?
Yeah, me too.
If
Why?
so, your conclusions are predetermined,
Yeah.
right? So your thesis can only go so far, and so that is a frustrating thing in Christian academia.
So that was part 1 of my conversation with Paul from Apologia. Stay tuned for part 2, or else I will link to it down below when it drops, where we talk a little bit more specifically about some of our favorite Bible examples of things apologists say, as well as the classic loony, liar, or Lord argument. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much to Paul for joining me. I'll see you next time.